I've sent 4 kids to college, and it never once occurred to me or my children to call the admissions office. And so my question to the two of you is it a good idea? Are you a resource for parents and for teenagers? And does that annoying parent who calls too often ever impact their child's ability to get into the school?
I guess I can start. Well, working at a small private liberal arts college, I can tell you that calling the office is advantageous. Last week I was interviewing student workers. There was a panel of student workers, 4 of them, and each one of them told me about a story, how they were impacted by talking to one of my counselors, and that this counselor helped them through the process, how appreciative they were of this particular counselor, and this counselor was instrumental in getting them to attend Ohio Wesleyan. So it can help. On the flip side, we, as a group, were talking about a particular parent. There was 5 of us standing in the admission, what we call a little bullpen, talking about a particular problematic parent that we all had dealt with that weekend. But we are professional enough and wise enough to know that we separate the parent from the child. There are many cases where we have a difficult parent. However, we don't penalize the student in any way because of the difficulties that that parent has shown in the admission process.
I would add that even at a big school like Ohio State, we certainly want to be a resource and answer questions and never have hesitation to do so. Even if it's the 10th time that day we've had the exact same conversation, we know it's unique and new for families as you're going through this process. My one piece of advice for parents, if you do call on behalf of your children, which is certainly appropriate, just don't start the conversation by saying, my child has no idea I'm calling, please don't tell them. We want this to be a partnership. We want this to be an engaged, a family conversation. So not that anyone in this room would do that, but maybe just share that advice with your friends.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one other tip is don't start the conversation as a parent with, when I was filling out the application, bad, don't do that.
Okay, so this is a question that's been thrown around in the news for a lot recently, and the question is whether we're being alarmed by true facts or it's media anxiety. Do you look at social media for your applicants?
I'll start this one. Students, plug your ears. No. Parents, you can tell them whatever you want. We don't. Ohio State, and I would say many of our public colleagues don't, simply because our job's busy enough. Now, if there's a reason to, if we find a reason, whether it's through the application, whether it's through materials that we submit, whether it's just, I'm watching the news in the morning getting ready and they're talking about a story that has to do with a local, a 16 or 17-year-old in the community, I do, when I get to work, look up that student's name just to check because, for good and bad, for positive and potentially not positive reasons. At the end of the day, I think what's most important for students especially, and I still struggle with this every day too, everything you put on social media is public information or can be public information, and it doesn't go away. Despite what you think, deleting a tweet, removing yourself tagged in a picture doesn't mean that it disappears. So you really want to understand that it may not impact you now from the college perspective, but I've heard many, many stories down the road where it can impact you from an employment perspective. So don't just think about short term, think about long term, and people like the individual sitting at this table right here that might be interviewing you to hire you someday, because that can stay with you for many, many years down the road.
I would add that even though I don't make it a habit of looking on social media, I know members of my staff, the younger members in particular, will. If they have a question about a student, they'll get on and do a little more investigating. And just to add to Keith, I've seen examples where students still in college have been impacted by social media, especially when they're looking at fields like education. I've had students who have been denied student teaching roles or internships. So it even begins before you're starting to look for that job after college.
So there's a certain mystery after you click submit, and with this sense of entirely randomness to who gets in and who doesn't. And certainly from local communities, if one gets in and one doesn't, the conversation is, but I looked better, I looked stronger, I don't know why he got in. So can you shed some light on what happens in your university once the student clicks submit?
Well, that'll vary from place to place. It's all a different process. I think Carrie touched on it very well, and that is the one thing that you don't know is what in particular is that institution looking for that given year. We are all in it. We're counselors, but we're also in enrollment, and part of our job is to optimize the institution's a strategic plan or their goals for that particular year or long-range plan. So we are mindful of distribution of enrollment by major. We are mindful of athletics. We are mindful of the orchestra. We are mindful of tuition revenue. The problem is you don't know what it is we're trying to optimize. And so, and we're not going to share that with you, to be honest. So from any given year, that can change from year to year, and we can have two candidates that look pretty identical, that may attend the same high school, have the same academic prowess. However, one may have a talent in that particular year that we're searching for that maybe the other doesn't.
Nope.
Covered it.
All right. Same for you?
I concur.
Okay, let me stop and say, does anyone have any questions that they're sitting on right now? Oh, great, okay. We'll take that in 1 second. So when it comes to the essay, which so much time is spent on this essay in schools, in thought processes, there's another one over there. Yeah. There's this idea of being your authentic self, right? Like there's all this conversation about let your personality shine through. But on the other hand, some of our kids' authentic selves aren't so extraordinary. So in a very lovely way. So what do you suggest when we're trying to integrate those two concepts in an essay?
Sure. This is a very timely question because I just spent 3 hours this morning at a high school doing a workshop for English teachers on this exact topic. I think for me, what I look for most is that student voice. Every student has a story, and I want to know what it is that's going to enhance my campus, what it is about the student that they've done, they've experienced, and we're not talking about a need for, I discovered a cure for insert, disease here, or, I founded this nonprofit that is now helping, 10,000, members of my community. That's great, but that's not the normal experience. It can be unique for each individual. So just one quick example, one of our essays this year talked to, if you were to go back and talk to your 5-year-old self, what would you tell, what would that conversation sound like? And one of the students started their essay by saying, if I could go back and talk to my 5-year-old self, I would tell them what a failure I've become. Because when I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a ninja, and I'm not a ninja. And they got me. That was the hook. And I was all in at that point. And then she proceeded to go on and talk about what she was going to do in college and how it was going to help shape her for the rest of her life. That's not a topic that I think a lot of students would think I'm going to write about in my college essay about the fact that I am not a ninja. So, we're not looking for these, graduate level thesis, papers. Please don't right click and go down to thesaurus and figure out how many big words you can use. If I can't understand it, then we have a problem, although that's not, I guess, a stretch because I don't have the mastery of a lot of people. But the essay is a reason for me to say yes. It's never a reason that I'm going to say no. But for that student that I feel like could be a good fit, and I'm really looking for that reinforcement that this is the right student and this is the right decision, the essay can certainly help in that conversation.
I'm going to put a plug in for a movement that Ohio Wesleyan has been a part of. It actually started out of Harvard, and many of the Ivies have joined Stanford, Harvard, MIT, and it's you could Google it. It's called Turning the Tide, Making Caring Count. And it's a group of admission counselors mostly, or VPs and directors, who have said, you know, enough of this frenzy. What really matters to us is how are students committed to the community and committed to caring, and that is what we want to see demonstrated by both what they do in terms of their activities, by what they write about, and what they care about. So I would just encourage you to Google it. We are trying to be more mindful about this whole process that have set everybody on edge about what they're writing and what they're doing and what they're listing on their application. Because the bottom line is we want good citizens, we want caring and compassionate students on our campus.
Great, thanks. So here's one great question. What is the biggest mistake or misunderstanding that you see in the admissions process?
It may sound obvious, but not paying attention to deadlines is the biggest mistake. They're there for a reason, and they're there to keep you eligible and in consideration for all the great opportunities that are out there. But if we have to make tough decisions, the first way that we do that are looking in many cases to those students who did or didn't meet a deadline. I think that another misconception is there's a secret formula that you have to figure out that we're looking for. There's a right combination of classes. There are right extracurriculars and wrong extracurriculars. There's right essays and wrong essays. And that's not the case. Every application is unique. Every student is unique. You know, at Ohio State and a lot of our public colleagues that are like us, you know, we read every application that we receive. And this year it was over 49,000. We're looking at every application, and each student is unique. My director of admission likes to say that we work in the admissions office, not the rejection office. We are looking for reasons to say yes. And at the end of the day, we can't say yes to everybody, but we want to say yes to as many students as possible. And every student is going to bring something different to our campus.
Nothing to add? Okay. This is a great question. So U.S. News and World Report comes out with its rankings every year. And it really sets a tone around schools and which ones are more popular and worthwhile. How do you suggest people look at those rankings? And do we trust those rankings?
Well, there's a great article. I talked to one family at the table today that came out in the Washington Post, and the education writer talks about a group of schools called Colleges That Change Lives. And many years ago, Lauren Pope, who was the New York Times education writer, wanted to put a stop to this focus on students only looking at the Ivies, and identified 40 schools that are maybe hidden gems to many of you that really have the capacity by their form of education to change a student's lives while they're there. And his premise was get beyond the rankings, but there are many great places that may not be on your radar that really can be very impactful for your student. I think Carrie did a nice job in touching on that in terms of it's really about fit. It's really about what type of college is going to take your child from where they are and you can watch them grow and blossom. It's not about a ranking, which is really, if you're thinking about the rankings, these are all based on inputs, right? So the highest ranked institutions are those that have the highest SAT and the highest GPA and the highest endowments and the highest rates of giving. And that's like ranking a hospital on the health of the patient as they're incoming, right? We don't do that. So if you have healthy patients entering a hospital and they leave healthy, okay, why would they be ranked the top? So I think you really have to do your homework. It doesn't just boil down to a number, and it's going to take a lot of your time, and it's going to entail you visiting the college or you talking to other students who may have attended or other parents who know about that place. But there's no easy magic formula that can be boiled down in the top 10 or top 20.
Nope.
So we really want the formula.
As soon as I figure it out,
You mentioned demonstrating your interest, showing up at the school. So it's not financially feasible for everybody to do this idea of demonstrated interest by showing up on the campus. Are there alternative things for people to do, and does that matter for all universities and colleges?
I'll answer the last question first. No, it doesn't matter for all. So Ohio State does not track or use demonstrated interest in our process for a lot of the reasons you just touched on. We know not every student has the ability to come to our campus, to engage with us in the same way. You all could be in our office every day if you could. Not that I encourage that, but it's. I always say, what is it for the student that makes the most sense? Do you need to come to 5 campus visits because you're getting something out of each one? Fantastic. Are you showing up just so your name keeps popping up on the list? That maybe isn't quite as impactful for us. But it does differ from school to school. So while we absolutely want to engage with students and families at any point in the process, at any point in time, in a lot of different ways, when it comes down to making the admission decision, that's not part of our review process. But that's one distinction that you want to look at because other schools will consider it in different ways.
Yeah, I would encourage, if you have a school that's rising to the top of your list, there should be some demonstrated interest. For many schools, we are looking at it. It could be in many forms. It could be the campus visit, it could be the high school visit, it could be attending a reception off campus in a city in which we're not located. It could be opening an email. Believe me, with technology, we are tracking everything. It could be talking to an admission counselor. And I'll give a great example. This happened to me today. We have a full tuition scholarship that we had awarded, and the student had turned us down. And so we're looking for the second person to award this to. And the first question I had is, who has demonstrated interest? So I know when we're awarding the scholarship, they're likely to attend. And so we're looking, did they call us? Have they visited? And in our process, when we are ready to read applications, any contact they've had with us is listed right on the front of the application as we're reviewing. So we do take it into consideration.
Any other questions that we should take from you guys? Hold the card up, great. While we're waiting for that one, so there's early decision, early action, rolling admission. Some of them are binding, some of them are not. How does that weigh into if you have financial constraints? What does that mean for a family if they're going into a binding decision or not?
It's all going to change next year with something called the prior. The FAFSA is now going to be looking at your prior year income taxes. So this will really push up the whole process. For many schools who have early decision, what that means is you will be able to file your FAFSA in October versus waiting until the end of January. So as we're reviewing early decision candidate, we will also be able to award financial aid if you get everything on time to us. So that's kind of changed everything on its head. However, if you don't have your aid award in at that time for early decision is always binding on acceptable financial aid. So if you're admitted early decision and you get an award from us and you say you can't afford it, we're not going to hunt you down and imprison you and force you to attend. So we know that that's always the out. Sometimes it doesn't work out financially for the families.
Early action, which is an admissions process that we have at Ohio State, is really in place for students to get an earlier decision. It is not binding. So by meeting our early action deadline, we are committing to that student that we will have a decision out back to them by a certain date. If students apply by our regular decision deadline, still considered for admission, still the same process, but they may just hear later in the timeline.
I have time for one more question, and then what I want to tell you is that we're going to send out an email tomorrow. If you have any questions at the end of the evening, you can submit them. There'll be a link to click to. You'll submit the questions, and we will get answers back to you. So I'm going to ask one more question here, and I think this is interesting. They were all interesting. Don't take it the wrong way if I don't ask yours. Some colleges are having students submit a short video of themselves in place of an essay. Is this a new trend?
I know of a handful of colleges that are doing that. I don't know the results of such. I don't know personally if I agree with that particular strategy. I'm not going to say any more.
I think it's too early to be able to say if this is a trend. I think we'll know over the next few years as we see maybe more and more schools, but more importantly, how it's being used and how it's impacting decisions that colleges are making.
I personally think it's probably more of a marketing angle to get the institution that is getting the most notoriety. It's probably a way to separate themselves from the pack, but how useful it is, I'm not sure.
Susan Dileno, Keith Gehres, thank you so much. Really great information.